Would you describe yourself as impatient? Maybe even addicted to speed? Are you constantly racing against the clock, equating busyness with effectiveness? Do you find yourself overwhelmed by the fast pace of modern life, yet unable to slow it down? I wonder, when was the last time you took a moment to truly savor life's simple pleasures without feeling rushed and without feeling guilty? In today's episode, I am deeply honored to welcome Carl Honore, the celebrated advocate of the global slow movement. Carl is a best-selling author and speaker and champions the art of slowing down in a world obsessed with speed and fast forward. His insights offer a refreshing perspective on balancing productivity with well-being. However busy you are, this conversation will inspire you to embrace the power of slowing down. Carl, a warm welcome to the Charlène and Giselle show. I am delighted to invite you here today. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here and I'm in good form. I'm looking forward to an interesting chat with you.
Likewise, I was reflecting on how long I've been familiar with your work and how honored I am to have you as a guest on my show after being so inspired by what you do. And I was thinking about when I found out about all the marvelous things that you do in praise of slow. And it reminded me of when I was studying the Primal Health course. And one of the books that was recommended for us to read around this idea of slowing down was actually your book, In Praise of Slow. So here you go.
So I was on the curriculum, you mean?
Indeed, yes.
The reading list.
Very much so. And praised as well. So there you go. One of the reasons I've become really fascinated with your work is that in my line of work, coaching high performers that are sometimes struggling with burnout and anxiety, insomnia, slowing down is met with quite a lot of resistance. I'm trying to put it mildly. And I would love if perhaps as a starting point, you could walk us through your journey. What has made you realize the importance of slowing down?
Well, I'm a naturally very fast person. So I'm a type A by birth. And so my natural instinct has always been to do things fast. And then I got to a stage where I was working as a foreign correspondent, which is a pretty quick profession. And then I had my first child. Or we had my first child. My wife obviously had it. I was just there for the ride. And that kind of changed everything in the sense that I think when we get stuck in fast forward, like you talk about your high performing clients, when you get stuck in roadrunner mode and every moment of the day becomes a race against the clock, sometimes it takes a shock to the system or a wake up call to make you realize that you have forgotten how to slow down and that this is doing you real harm. And for a lot of people, the wake up call comes in the form of an illness. One day the body just says, that's it, can't take the pace anymore, and you have a burnout, or you can't get out of bed one morning. My wake-up call came when I became a father, and I found myself reading bedtime stories to my little boy, and I couldn't slow down, right? So I'd go into his room at the end of the day and speed read Snow White. So I'd be skipping lines. I became an expert actually in what I call the multiple page turn technique, which I don't know if any parent I'm sure listening will be wincing in recognition. You try and smuggle 3 pages past to get to the end quicker. And it was awful. I mean, I knew this just felt wrong. And my son, he never got fooled by these tricks. He knew the stories back to front. So he'd always catch me and say, Daddy, why are there only 3 dwarves in the story? What happened to Grumpy? And this pretty lamentable state of affairs went on for some time until I caught myself flirting with buying a book I'd heard about called The 1 Minute Bedtime Story. So Snow White in 60 seconds. And I remember hearing about this book and thinking, hallelujah, man, I need that book now. Amazon, drone delivery. But then a second reaction came, light bulb over the head. And I suddenly thought, whoa, what's going on here? I mean, this is insane. You're racing through your life instead of actually living it. And that was that was hitting rock bottom for me. Thankfully, I didn't have a health problem that was the alarm bell for me. It was just suddenly coming face to face with the horror of trying to read my son a soundbite instead of a story at the end of the day. And that's when I just thought, I've lost my way. I've lost my mind, right? I need to slow down. And that was the start of the current chapter of my life, if you like. That was the inflection point.
And did you find that it then had an impact on other areas of your life?
Very much so. And it's a slow impact as well. I think one of the ironies today is that we're also impatient that we even want to slow down fast, right? So people will watch, I don't know, a talk of mine or read a book and they'll say, yeah, I want to slow down. And then they sign up for yoga. Then they run across the street to do some meditation. Then they rush home to cook a slow food. And you think, well, that's not quite the right approach here. And people expect instant results. The trouble, of course, is that when you're marinated in speed, it becomes a kind of addiction. We're addicted emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, physically to a fast forward lifestyle. And you don't just snap your fingers and become the Dalai Lama tomorrow morning. I mean, it doesn't happen that way. It's a process. So for me, it was a slow thing as well to go from being a road runner to being somebody who was choosing when to be fast, because I'm not against speed. Sometimes fast is exactly the right option, but also knowing how to go slow. And it took time. Sometimes I found myself slowing down and then I would speed up again. But now I've reached the stage where I have a very exciting life. I get lots done, right? I have fun, but I never feel rushed. And that's where you want to get to. You could be living in a fast world, thriving in a fast world, but not feeling overhurried. And, there are many steps you take to get there. And you mentioned, just to pull on one of the threads in your question, you talked about, did it affect other corners of your life? I think that's inevitable. And it's a good thing. People often start trying to slow down in one aspect of their lives, which is normal and natural and makes sense. So it might be at work, it might be with your children, it might be at exercise. You think, I need to slow this down. I'm doing this too fast. But you start to see the benefits in that one sphere, and then it percolates out. It spreads into the rest of your life. You think, you know what? I've stopped rushing the clock all the time in this area of my life. I'm going to start doing the same in the other. And then before long, it becomes just your way of moving through the world, that you arrive at each moment thinking, not how can I do this as fast as possible, but how can I do this as well as possible? Really simple idea, but one that changes everything from the ground up.
And when done well, would you say that there is also a scope for done more mindfully, or in a state where you're more present and more intentional?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that when I first started writing about slow and posited the idea of a slow movement with a capital S, there was no talk of, the whole mindfulness thing came later. But as soon as the mindful revolution and boom cracked across the world, the first article I read about it, I thought, this is just another way of talking about what I've been saying with slow, right? Because when I talk about slow with a capital S, I don't mean doing everything slowly, right? It's really much more a mindset or a chip that you change in your head. It's a state of mind. It's a mentality. It's about being present and in the moment. It's about doing one thing at a time. It's about doing everything as well as possible instead of as fast as possible. And that means choosing the right move, speed, pace, physically, but also mentally, to be there, to give each thing the time and attention it deserves. That's another way to think of it. And I think that's another way of saying mindful, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And what do you say to the inevitable pushback of, say, let's pick Paul, for example. Paul is listening to us today, and he is very much convinced by what he's hearing, but Paul works at a very large investment bank, right? And he has a very heavy workload and a very demanding boss and very demanding clients. And he's thinking, this all sounds wonderful, but how am I to take this home and take this to the office when the whole environment around me is on fast forward?
Yeah. Well, I would say to Paul two things. The first, and this is the more radical answer, there are some workplaces that are probably irredeemable. So if you're somewhere that's going to end up ruining your health and your happiness and all your relationships because it just simply will never slow down, get out now. Go do something different. Go to a different bank. change industry, make a big change and save your life and lead a life worth living, right? A life worthy of the name. That's the radical solution. The more moderate solution is to pause, reflect, take a hard look at how you're using time, both at work and away from work, and find those little points, those little windows where you can make changes, because you don't have to become the Dalai Lama meditating 6 hours a day. You might just take 6 minutes a day to breathe, do some breathing exercises after you come home from work, right? Everybody's got 6 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't, then you might want to be referred back to my original answer. So find those little small levers you can pull. It might be just as simple as, instead of wolfing down your lunch, sitting hunched over a keyboard looking at a screen, get up and walk to a quiet part of the building, or to see a friend, or sit at a park bench and eat your lunch away from the office. It doesn't have to be a 4-hour Mediterranean banquet, right? It can be 15 minutes with your salad or your wrap or whatever it is you have at lunch, or your soup. Maybe it's just 10 minutes, but just make those little shifts so that you can get away from the tsunami of speed and distraction and stimulation. So I think that's the kind of moderate answer. There's another addendum to that answer, which is, no man is an island, no woman is an island, and it's harder to slow down on your own. So if you're in a team or in a department or whatever, get the conversation going about too much speed, how it's hurting and harming your health, your productivity, your ability to concentrate and deal with clients, your accuracy when playing with numbers, all the stuff that it's harming you with. Get that conversation out there. Have a coffee morning with your team and say, okay, how do we all feel about the pace that we're working at? Does it make sense? Are we all silently dying inside and wishing that it were slower? If the answer is yes, we all would love a little bit more slowness. What can we do together? Can we rethink our use of technology? Could we say that every day, every member of the team is allowed to be not to have to look at messages for an hour or something? Or, whatever it is, just come up with little pilot projects that you run together as a group or a team or a department, run them for a week. And at the end of the week, say, how'd that feel? What was it like to switch off for an hour? What was it like to leave the office at 7 p.m. instead of 8:30? Did we suffer? Did we miss out on business? And work from there. And because it's only one thing is hearing the case for slow, because the argument for slowing down is irrefutable, right? Every major, like The Economist, Harvard Business Review, you're going to find compelling evidence in all of those august organs telling you that you need to slow down sometimes in the modern workplace. In order to thrive in a fast world, you need to slow down. The facts are there. Facts are only going to get you so far. You need to experience it. So I think it's so important for Paul and Paul's team and colleagues to try stuff out, to have an experiential contact with slowness and see what it feels like, and pluck out the bits that work, let the stuff that doesn't work fall by the wayside, and hammer out your own version of slow. Because there is no universal recipe for slowing down, not for Paul, not for Paul's bank, not for anyone, right? It's really about taking the time to look at yourself, look at your team, look at your workload, look at the industry you're in, the clients you interact with, and asking, where can I pivot here? Where can I channel slow in a way that's going to help me and everyone around me thrive? There are ways. You just have to take the time to find them.
Absolutely. And do you think there is also perhaps a misconception at a corporate level that fast equals better or equals productive?
Yeah. I mean, I come across that. I mean, I've been working with companies and in the corporate world now for, nearly 20 years. And I still run into this roadblock with sometimes it's the person at the top, sometimes it's someone 3 or 4 rungs down the ladder. But though inevitably in any organization, there will be somebody who is enthralled to speed, right? Who just cannot get around their head around the idea that slowness could be anything other than a disaster for the company. So yes, those people do exist, but they can be got round, because most people in any organization who are doing the work day to day understand, they can see where it would be good for them and for the company and the bottom line to slow down a bit. The trouble is that it's very often just enough to have one person digging in their heels and saying, no, faster is better. We can't have slow here. That's a catastrophe for everybody. Sometimes it's enough for one person to stop everybody, but not forever. Because if everyone else rises up and said, hang on a minute here, look, there is a better way to do this. If we just stop, talk, observe, try stuff out, we will find a better balance between fast and slow in this company. And this company will thrive and be better as a result. But you will run up against the odd dinosaur who clings to the idea that faster is better. But the operative word here is dinosaur.
And when you do come up with that, do you go back to data or research that actually shows that slowing down can be hugely beneficial for a corporation, for a team, for workers, professionals, however type A plus they may be, and however high achievers they may identify, it can be beneficial.
Yeah, but as I say, I think stats, data, case studies, histories from other companies, that only gets you so far, especially with someone who's a deep and abiding skeptic about slowness, right? Who's a slow skeptic, and who is a true believer in the God of speed. The only way to break through that is to get that person to experience the power of slow. So that's where those pilot projects, those little experiments that I recommended a moment ago, that's where they come in. Just invite that person to play around a little bit. Next week, whenever you're finished the work, you go home. At the beginning of a meeting, we're going to start off every meeting with a minute of silence where people can just take it all down, focus, get into the room, turn off their phones, and be present. And then we're going to see how the meeting goes after that. I guarantee the meeting will be more focused, more streamlined, more productive, and it'll actually be faster, right? It'll be quicker. This is what I call the delicious paradox of slow, that when you slow down to the right speed, you do things at what musicians call the tempo giusto, the correct tempo, somewhere between fast and slow. Maybe it's fast, maybe it's slow, maybe it's allegre, lento, whatever. If you do it at the right speed, then not only do you get better results, but often you get those results faster, right? So, you have to slow down to speed up, if you like, is another way to think of it. And so if you just try those little experiments, I think you can show that slow skeptic that he or she has got the wrong end of the stick.
Yes, absolutely. To what extent do you find that there is perhaps a psychological connection between the aversion to slowness and the tendency to be somewhat impatient?
Very much. I think these things are all tied up. I mean, we live in an impatient culture, right? It's a culture that cultivates and even celebrates impatience. I was just on a website this morning and I hit a link to move forward, and a little sentence popped up saying, if this page does not load in 5 seconds, click here. And I thought, you got to be kidding. It's like 5 seconds. I couldn't even get my finger to the screen, to the keyboard quickly enough. It had already moved on anyway. And I think that we just are completely bombarded and pelted constantly with the idea, because we have such a distorted and unhealthy relationship with time. We see time as this limited resource, and the way to make the most of it is to go faster and faster, do more and more with less and less time. But that's totally the wrong approach, because that just means you do lots of things not very well. And that's the best way to waste time, right? So I think that there's impatience. Slowness is an antidote to impatience, right? Because if you start to play around with slow, you get more comfortable with slowing down. That's when you become more patient. And that's why when people say, what is one really good way to cultivate patience, to get comfortable with slowness? I mean, obviously I run whole day workshops on this, but one of the things I often suggest to people is getting out into nature, green space. People call it forest bathing or ecotherapy or green pause or whatever. But there's something about being in Mother Nature, because of course nature doesn't do impatience. Nature everything happens in nature at the right speed. There's one speed in nature, and that's the speed things happen at, right? It's like you can't hire 9 women to produce a baby in 1 month, right? These things have a natural time arc. And being
not yet.
Oh. maybe ChatGPT is going to come up with that next year. but that's the one thing that nature can teach us, and actually I think it rubs off on us. And we do know that studies show pretty clearly that spending time in nature reduces feelings of stress and sharpens concentration, and gently takes down impatience, right? Because I think you begin to imbibe that eternal lesson from Mother Nature, which is there's no point rushing here. All things in their time. Things will take the time they take, and you're better off going with that rhythm to get the most out of them. So I always suggest to people, one thing is just to spend a bit of time in nature. Now, you don't have to go on a 9-mile hike in the woods. That's a wonderful thing. You can go for a 9-minute walk in the park across from your office, right? And that can make a big difference.
But even then, sometimes I catch my clients following that advice and being on their phone. So then
Exactly.
you wonder how much of a nature immersion that is.
Yes.
When one is on social media.
It's not a nature immersion at all, actually. Yes, of course. Yeah, the phone. Now, I'm not a Luddite. I love technology. I've got the latest iPhone and MacBook. I mean, these are wonderfully fun toys and incredibly useful tools for being productive. But there's a big but in there, right? I mean, they all have an off button somewhere. We don't use the off button. The gadgets start to backfire on us, and first of all, they end up penetrating and polluting the most intimate moments of our lives. I mean, there's research suggesting now that 1 in 5 of us interrupt the act of making love to our partner to do something with our phone, like look at a message or answer a call, or I don't know, send a tweet or something. You just think, what is that? It's like, time out, darling. I need to tell my followers I'm getting lucky. Do we upload a photo? You're not supposed to be thinking about that in those moments. And if you are, you're doing it all wrong. So a big part of slowing down is forging a much more balanced and sensible relationship with technology, knowing when to turn off and when to turn on. And when you're trying to tap into that deep reservoir of slowness and patience that Mother Nature offers us, that's the time to turn off your phone, right?
Mm-hmm. I found, Carl, I don't know how it is in your experience, but for me, simple little steps, such as not looking at my phone the moment I wake up and buying myself the grace of, be it 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I would love to tell you that every morning I take 30 minutes and I don't look at my phone, but it wouldn't be true. It's my ideal, but I'm not always there. I have days where I do need to turn to my phone quite rapidly, but I really do my absolute best to put systems in place in my bedroom, because I don't trust myself, to make sure that I'm not tempted by the phone from the moment I wake up, and I have those 10, 15 quiet minutes to just land,
To land.
Land.
That's so wise. I do something very similar. And it's a perfect illustration of how that's slow in action, right? You're not getting up and doing intense meditation. You're just simply being. You've stopped doing. You're allowing yourself to wake up at your own pace, and you've taken technology out of the equation for a few minutes. And that people may think, well, that feels like a waste of time, but actually it's the complete opposite. It's a very wise investment of your time, because by starting off on that gentle groove, you set yourself up for the rest of the day, right? You've got better focus. You're going to enjoy your breakfast more. You'll probably digest better, and then when you do pick up your phone, you're going to have more concentration. You'll be better equipped to deal with the stuff, rather than the very second your eyes open up, you're already on LinkedIn or in your inbox or something. And it can be, it can be just 5 minutes. You just talked about 15, sometimes it's 30. But it's the principle. It's the idea of changing gears, having those little moments of quiet, because we are, human beings, we are not algorithms or machines or robots. You can't push go and we run for 24 hours a day. This is not the way it works, right? We need to stop. We need to pause. We need times of serenity, silence, tranquility, quiet, doing nothing, to recharge not only our physical batteries, but our mental cells, to fire up our brains, and also to have, this is something I think that also gets lost in the equation sometimes when we talk about slowing down, because people often start with I'll be less productive. Oh, slowing down. Oh, I'm getting more productive. But there's something deeper here, which is that I think one of the main drivers of our speed culture and keeping ourselves constantly busy and overstimulated and distracted is fear. We're actually running away from ourselves. It's much harder to be quiet and alone with yourself, alone with your thoughts. It's easier to fill up your mind with trivia, and instead of dealing with big questions like, who am I? What is my purpose here? Am I living the right life for me, or am I on autopilot? It's much easier to grapple with small questions, to sweat the small stuff like, where are my keys? I'm late for my 11 a.m., right? Or what's happening on Instagram? It's so much easier to do that. But you do that, you choose that option, and you will be living on autopilot. It's only by stopping and having moments to reflect, to look at the big picture, to join the dots, to be alone with your own thoughts. That's when you work out who you are and how you fit into the world. It's how you forge the right path for you. If you got all these doors in front of you to choose from, how do you pick? You only pick the right door for you by having that deep, abiding contact with the self, asking those questions. And the only way to get there, to do that metaphysical, intellectual, emotional homework, is to slow down, right? You can't download it from Amazon or get ChatGPT to do it for you. You have to slow down and spend that time with yourself, whether it's those minutes first thing in the morning in bed when you've woken up, or going for a walk in the park, or whatever it is. You need to get off the grid. You need just to be with yourself. You need to slow down in order to grapple with the big stuff. Because it's only by getting the big stuff right that you'll do the right things on the small scale, right?
Absolutely. At this point, I feel, though, Carl, that I need to make a confession. I wasn't always an advocate of slow. I've become one because I was probably not probably, that's an understatement, definitely the queen bee of back to back, and I am busy and I have no time, and rush, and living off that rush. And I was really, actually, I think you could say, addicted to the rush, but I was not aware. And I only became aware through a journey that was perhaps a bit unusual, but after a major burnout episode, I decided to do quite a big change and go tabula rasa and go all the way to India and actually go and live in an ashram for a few months with incredible gurus that taught me the art and power of meditation and breath work and silence. And one of my teachers was incredibly wise, and he said something that might seem quite simple in nature, but was so profound in impact, is that, and at that point, I have to say I had paid a lot of money for therapies and counseling, but that one thing that he said would have saved me a lot of money if it had been said before. As just reflecting on my burnout and my suffering at this point, and he said, but Charlène, you spent so much time doing that you forgot to spend time being. Not quite rocket science, I admit, but so profound when I reflected on it. And yes, it was the setting and the fact that I did have time, or rather made time, to reflect on that statement because I was in an ashram with not much else to do. Yeah. But it really shifted my perception, and I was left with the rather uncomfortable realization that I had spent the good part of my entire adulthood chasing doingness.
Yeah. You're not alone. Or I'm thrilled that you've come out the other end. There are many people still there, though, in that whirlwind, that cult of busyness, right? I mean, it's woven into our vernacular, right? We talk about, the early bird catches the worm, lunches for wimps, and you just ask somebody how they're doing. Yeah. You say, how are you doing? They say, busy. They don't even tell you, and if you're not busy, somehow that's a sign of failure, right? Like being busy is a badge of honor. It's a mark of prestige. It shows how important you are. And I think this is part of the same running away from ourself phenomenon I was describing a moment ago. You're chasing your tail in this endless arms race of speed. Where are you actually going? I so often think people are not running and racing to something. They're running and racing away from something. And very often what they're running and racing away from is themselves. And it's really slowness that gets you back. And it can be scary at first, right? but it's so worth doing. And it's, I remember just hearing you there talk about burnout reminded me that another thing to throw into the mix here is that therapists very often say that the final stage before a real burnout is one last burst of acceleration. So it's like you're desperately, you can feel all these problems building up, catching up with you. You haven't done any of that homework I talked about. You're trying to outrun it. You try and speed up and then you smash and you hit the wall, right? And you have your burnout. And then you're forced to slow down. You're forced to do that cognitive, emotional, spiritual, psychological heavy lifting. And through that slowness, you come back into the world. And it's very revealing. Very few people, in fact, I would almost venture that nobody has two burnouts, like real burnouts. Like you have one real burnout and you realize just the folly of living in fast forward. You realize that you were skimming the surface. You were living someone else's life. You were following another script. You were racing through your life instead of living it. And I don't think many people, if any, go back. Once they've got their health back from the burnout, they go right back to what they were before. I think usually people have had that learning there. They've had that eye-opening experience, that epiphany, if you like. And they go back with the kind of spirit that you're describing yourself, where you're someone who still sometimes finds themselves going a little faster than they want, or maybe checking their phone more than they think they should. But basically, the North Star, the driving impulse for you and for people like me is to find the balance, right? Find the right speed for the moment, to live the moment instead of rush through it, to savor the minutes and the seconds instead of counting them.
Absolutely. It really made me think about a story from one of my own clients just the other week when you mentioned about this business status. And just like you mentioned it, she actually was known in the law firm. So she was a client working in a law firm to reply, "I'm busy" to the question, "How are you?" systematically. So she wouldn't say anything else. It would be like busy, as in just go away, busy. And the associates and collaborators started to not make a joke, because she was a very, very highly respected and very senior lawyer at the firm, but it was becoming the running joke in the office. And I did coach her, and she did say that to me too when I asked, "And how are you?" Now, of course, you can get away with busy with your colleagues, but when you hire a coach and you say busy, there is a bit of exploration to be done.
Yeah.
And Carl, what really, really touched me was that I had to ask 5 times before I got to an answer that actually couldn't come up in words. She just burst into tears. I asked 5 times and she said busy 5 times. And on the 6th occasion, she had no words but to cry.
Yeah. That says a great deal, doesn't it? That says what a lot of people are experiencing, I think, which is that busyness is the way to wall yourself off. It's an instrument of denial. It's a shield from the stuff that's going to make you cry, right? The difficult things that you're avoiding or you're not wanting to confront. And eventually you not only do you have to confront those things, you really should, because that's what a life is. Life is messy. It's got darkness, it's got light, it's chiaroscuro, right? It's a whole jumble of things, and that's what makes it extraordinary and luminous and miraculous, right? It's all these different shades that we have in our life. And that's one of the things you lose when you get stuck in busy fast mode. Everything becomes monochrome. You're just whizzing along and everything's a blur. You don't remember anything, nothing sticks. You're just busy, right? Until one day you're not, because you've crashed. Right. And that's, I mean, I think both of us, our work, a lot of it is dedicated to saving people from getting to that stage, right? Stopping them from reaching the crash moment, getting to them early enough that they can put on the brakes and start asking those questions and probing and exploring and creating a life that's right for them, rather than that's very fast and looks impressive to who? I mean, who is impressed by it? Most people don't even care about our lives, right? We're all in our own heads, so worried about what others think of us. But do they really think of us that much? There's a great quote from Ann Landers, the legendary agony aunt in the United States. She said once, at 20, we worry about what others think of us. At 40, we stop worrying about what others think of us. At 60, we realized they were never thinking of us at all, right? which which is a reminder of two things. One, that we do get more clear-eyed and a better grasp of what the world is like and what's going on in life as we age, right? That's one of the upsides of aging. But the second conclusion from that quote is, chill out, man. People are not ultra focused on everything you do, because so much of what keeps us in that busy, fast mode is a competitive thing where we think, well, it's the keeping up with the Joneses. They're seeming very, most people are not even noticing what you're doing. So stop worrying about what others are thinking, because they're probably not even thinking of you at all. And look inward. Take the time to slow down and look inward and start doing that homework so you can design the right life for you.
But sometimes, right, and I'm sure you've seen that as well in your practice, when you get these high performers to look inwards and to switch off the coping mechanism, which is busy and fast forward, because I'm not willing to deal with the things that I'm trying to avoid, then it can get sticky too, because sometimes those things they're trying to avoid are not very pretty. And then you have to do the real work.
That's when you roll up your sleeves, you get down in the trenches, and things can get ugly, definitely. But let's be honest, you'd rather have that than skating along the surface because if you don't confront the problems today, the problems just get bigger and bigger, right? It's like feeling a lump in your body somewhere and thinking, I'm not going to go to the doctor. I'm just going to keep on with my life. What does the lump do? It gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So, all the advice from all the medical people is, as soon as you feel that lump, do something about it, right? Confront it. And that's going to be much better for you in the long run than letting the lump get bigger and bigger and bigger while you have your eye somewhere else because you don't want to think about the lump, right? So, I didn't mean to bring in a cancer metaphor there, but I think that I do think in a way that the kind of fast forward culture is a kind of cancer. It's got a cancerous vibe to it, right? The way it consumes us and the way it can lurk below the surface, and we can sort of kid ourselves that we're okay when we're really not. And we can do that with the distraction techniques of busyness and speed, right? They're wonderful for helping us deny what's really happening to us or the world. But that's no way to live a life, is it? That's just, you're not living, you're just surviving in that case.
And how do you help organizations or corporation really cultivate that message? Because of course, as much as we are all very much responsible for our own journey and to put boundaries and measures in place, some of those things also need to be driven from the top, right? At an organizational level. Let's just call a cat, right? If our leaders, if our C-suites, if our partners are not going to walk the talk and just talk the talk, it's going to be really hard to see those changes at an organizational level. So I'm really curious, because I know how much extraordinary work you do with those organizations. How can we collectively really help to shift that paradigm and make those changes?
Well, I think whenever I've done anything with companies, and I think this is true of other people who go in and try and move the dial, or especially if it's trying to get companies that are enthralled to speed, to slow down, you need to run pilot projects and run experiments and so on. Because it's when we talk, I mean, you can have all of the stats and stuff, and you can show examples that's slowing down, but until people actually experience it, nothing will change. And so you need to get the most resistant person to speed as part of the experiment and run the experiment, right? So it could be anything. I mean, I mentioned you could do a system where people take a bit of a lunch break, or they're able to leave work when the work is done instead of just staying there putting in FaceTime, or all these things, and have conversations, just get people around the table, talk about it. And you will find from the very first pilot project you run, you will find a benefit of slow. It may not be the whole thing. You may need to adjust it, modify, tweak it a little, but you will find something, and everyone in that team will have experienced it. And that's immensely powerful, because once you've experienced something, you can brush aside stats and studies and think, yeah. But if you've actually felt it in your gut, you felt that by this one experiment in slowness that your company conducted for the week, you found that you were able to concentrate better, you remembered things better, you felt closer to your family in the evenings at home. You think, yeah, I want more of that. And it just becomes easier and more permissible for everybody to take a step closer to slow once you've tasted it. So pilot projects, they think like they'll be different for every company and every organization because everybody's in a different boat. But you just design your own experiments and then go from there.
And how much do you think that can play a part in burnout prevention, which is a huge problem right now across the corporate world in various industries? Do you believe that the praise of slowness can be a powerful tool to prevent burnout?
Oh, yes. I think slow, if properly deployed, is a secret sauce in the fight against burnout. Because what is burning people out? It's a sense of being overwhelmed, of being constantly rushed, of having no space or time to recharge, to refresh, to reset and reboot. It's just always on, that whole culture. And that takes a terrible toll on people's bodies, minds, relationships, everything that keeps us well takes a hit from too much speed. So as soon as you bring in the right kind of slowness, you create a culture that celebrates slow, that says, you know what? Okay, we're in a very fast industry here. There are times when we're going to have to move at superhuman speed, but not always, right? And in fact, if we have our moments when we slow down, that will make it so that when the fast moment comes, we're better able to cope. We'll be better at the fast if we master the slow. And that a big part of that will be because people are just healthier. They're more present. They're more focused. They got more energy. And all of that's good for avoiding burnout, right? Because it's when those reserves get depleted, that's when burnout kicks in. And slow is such a good way to keep you topped up in physical energy, emotional energy, mood, creativity. All these things, all these levels go up on the dashboard when you slow down wisely. So there's such a potent and irrefutable case for every company and every industry to find ways to slow down. That, I actually feel more optimistic about slow today than I did, all those years ago when I first got on this trail. Because so many companies and organizations and individuals have already slowed down in different ways and they've seen the benefits. And so we have case studies galore everywhere now. But the second reason I feel optimistic is that we actually need slow now today more than we did 10 years ago, right? Because the world has got so much faster. We've got, from when I first started talking about the slow revolution, the smartphone came along, social media. Now we've got artificial intelligence, which is threatening to crank up speed to unbelievable levels in every walk of life. And it's precisely when the world gets fast that human beings need to slow down, right? It's counterintuitive because people think, well, the world is fast, I need to keep up, so I got to go fast too. No, the opposite is true. We human beings are slow. I mean, Einstein said it himself. He said, computers are very fast, human beings are very slow. And together they're incredibly powerful, right? So we never would have beaten computers on speed. We're definitely not going to beat AI on speed. So the way to thrive in this fast world is to double down on what we're good at as human beings, which is the slow stuff. So the social connection, the communication, the listening, the persuasion, the inspiration, the leadership, all that kind of what they call soft skills. I mean, the whole idea of soft and hard just seems it's just so pompous and misdirected to me. And these are just different kinds of skills. They're human skills and they're essential in a human world. So you can only do all of those things like empathize, inspire, communicate, build teams, all that stuff, market, all those things. You need slowness, you need the human skills, and they're all based on slow. So as the world gets faster, we actually need, I think, slowness more than ever now. In fact, there's a little story I'll tell you from history that back in, I think it was 1917 in the Russian Revolution, when Russia was changing at just a crazy pace. Everything was new, day to day, things were changing super fast. And someone asked Boris Pasternak, so Pasternak, the author of Dr. Zhivago and winner of the Nobel Prize in software literature, someone said to him, surely, Boris, in this time when everything is changing so fast, we need to think faster. And he said, no, actually, the opposite is true. In an epoch of speed, one must think slowly. In an epoch of speed, one must think slowly. He uttered those words just over a century ago. They are even more appropriate today because it's only through slowness that human beings will carry on having a place to stand in the world, right? It's also through slowness that we will be able to understand the technology. So we have to slow ourselves down, reflect, talk, confront, explore, ponder, let our minds wander. That's the only way we will ever understand what's happening with this technology, and not only understand it, but fashion it, steer it, and push it in a direction that works for all of humanity, right? So it's not surprising that a few months ago, a whole bunch of tech titans in Silicon Valley signed a letter, including Elon Musk and that type, saying we need to push pause on the development of AI, right? We need to slow down, in other words, and really think about this, really talk it through and decide what we're going to do next. And these are the people who are the absolute sultans of speed. These are the speed merchants par excellence, right? The kind of the big boys, the bros of Silicon Valley. And what are they saying? They're saying, for the love of God, people, slow down, right? Slow the heck down. So I feel like the case for slow is just rock solid. It's urgent. We need it now more than ever. And I think also, if I could just throw in one more footnote here, the pandemic has given the slow revolution a real push, because what was the pandemic if not a global workshop in slowness? Yeah, like the whole world ground to a halt. We were forced to stay home. Many things, there was no FOMO because there was nothing to miss out on. We just were forced to slow down. A lot of people found it uncomfortable at first because for the first time in their lives, they had to confront themselves. They couldn't be busy. So what do you do if you're not busy? Panic, right? But with enough time, a lot of people got through that and began to think, you know what? It's kind of nice not rushing all the time, getting enough rest, having time to think, having time to enjoy stuff, and actually be as or more productive. So I think because the pandemic lasted long enough, you see a lot of people coming out of it, having done that heavy lifting, the thinking, the intellectual, emotional homework, coming out of the pandemic and making real deep tectonic changes in their lives and saying, you know what? I realize now the life I was living before was not for me. I was on autopilot. So I'm going to change careers or change the way I work or leave a bad relationship or move from the city to the country or the country. Big changes that people would never have made if they hadn't stopped, slowed down, and had done some deep, slow thinking. So put all that together, and I think that the slow revolution is coming fast.
And a lot of what you said really brought thoughts about leadership on my mind, because you can go to 1,000 leadership training and you will hear facilitator talk about active listening and empathy, and I am one of them. But I think in many ways, the elephant in the room is the slowness, because when a leader is slower, the leader will be more prone to active listening, to developing empathy, to being more proactive. What is checking in if not slowing down?
Totally.
Right? So we do this big talk around leadership, which I think are really important to be done and something to celebrate. But at the core, it's actually slowing down. Yeah. What's your take on that?
Oh, I could not agree more. I think it's going back to first principles. It's sort of a chicken and egg thing. You cannot have all of that good stuff, that basket of skills you talked about there, the empathy, the inspiring, the listening, all that stuff that goes into being a good leader. You can't do any of that if you're running around like a headless chicken. If you're stuck in fast forward, if you're a road runner, you have to slow down. And so it just seems more and more obvious to me, and I think to other people as well, that the first step to reimagining and reinventing the 21st century workplace is to get back in touch with our inner tortoise, to get back comfortable with the idea of slowness and to work out when to deploy it and when not to, right? But to have that spirit of slow, to have a calm mind. Even when things are moving fast, you can be slow on the inside. So everything comes back, whatever you're doing in any walk of life. I was going to say especially the workplace, but I'm not even sure I just think anywhere, but we're talking maybe especially about the workplace. So let's focus on that. Everything starts with the right mindset, right? Having what I'm calling a slow mindset. So you're not rushed, you're going through the moment, you're present, you're giving everything you do the time and attention it deserves. And that could be writing a company report. It could be talking to a machine operator on the factory floor. It could be lunching with a client. It could be, buying a bouquet of flowers from the woman who sells them on the corner. All those little moments add up to a big day. And you only get those moments to shine and sing if you move through them at the right pace, if you move through them with slow spirit.
One tool that I use, and I would love your insights on it, when I work with my clients to slow down, not to be less productive, but to be actually more performant.
Mhm.
So slowing down to perform in a way that is more durable, to sustain that high performance, is to actually slow down their breath. So 99% of my top performing clients, when they're actually on the brink of burnout, are hyperventilators. So they breathe really, really fast. And sometimes up to 21 breaths a minute when replying to an email, right? So we're talking like really fast. And I've measured those.
That's Olympic levels of breathing.
Right. So you are effectively breathing as if you were, running, right? Or more, much more. And just bringing that breath down, maybe going down to this, 10, 12, maybe even 6 breaths a minute, just to tone this down, goes such a long way, but it makes them feel so uncomfortable. Some of my clients describe it as they feel like they're holding their breath. And they're just finding it very hard because for the first time in decades, they're coming through to the realization that they're over-breathing. And that actually has a huge impact on cognitive performance and health and longevity. What's your take on that, on this idea that even the thing that we do most often in life, breathing, we speed up?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very telling, isn't it? It's a metaphor for the whole world that we live in now, that there is nothing that we won't accelerate. And we tend to accelerate in some ways the things that are most important to keep slow. We seem to try our best to get those as fast as possible. And breathing is a very good example. And it's so often it's simple, it's free, it's universal, it's there for all of us. And yet so many people are disconnected from breathing, right? It's just they're up in their heads, they're breathing too fast and so on. But you can unlearn those habits. And I'm sure in your own work, you've helped many people do just that, right? At first, there's a little bit of withdrawal symptoms. You feel uncomfortable because you're slowing your breath down. You feel like but the body is not built for hyperventilating, right? In certain moments, they may have a physiological use, but not often, right? Not when you're writing an email in the middle of the day. So I'm a big believer as well in finding little levers to pull throughout the day. And it could be as simple as just having a breathing moment where you just check in with your breath. And if it's too fast, you just slow it down. Or even if it's not, just to take a few particularly deeper breaths in that moment. And that makes a difference physiologically to you instantly, right? It's a fast way to slow down, if you like, right? It's a quick payoff. It's a kind of quick, slow fix, if you like.
Well, I was going to ask you, but I thought, is that really, really cheeky to ask a slow down expert? What is a fast way to slow down, please? What is the fastest way possible? Because I'm sure that's the question that's burning on my
you wouldn't be
surprised.
You wouldn't be surprised to hear that I often get asked that question. Yeah, no, I would say that's a very good one. I put that near the top of the list, if not at the top, is breathing. If you're looking for something that's just, because wherever you are, you're breathing, right? So you don't need to have anything with you. You just need to have awareness. That's the only thing you need to breathe deeper, more slowly, and better. So yeah, I would always suggest something like that. But I think also, just moving around the body, there's something that the body has a kind of ancient wisdom and an ancient understanding for what the right pace is. So go for a walk. There's something about walking. I mean, we know there's a lot of really good research on how walking is incredibly good for us physically, emotionally, cognitively, and so on. But I think you dig down to the core of it, and a lot of it has to do with that tempo giusto idea, right? The right speed, because let's face it, when you walk, when you're not walking at the right speed. Like if you're walking with someone, you're walking faster than it's uncomfortable. It's also uncomfortable if you're walking too slowly. We all have a natural pace. And so I think when you go for a walk with your phone turned off and you're just walking at the pace that feels right in the moment, that's almost like a kind of reminder to yourself about finding the right pace in every other aspect of your life. So those are two things I would say. Breathing, you don't even need to leave your desk to do that. Walking, of course, you do. But those are two really simple things you can do just to reset and reboot a little bit and come back refreshed, recharged, slowed down, but fired up, right? Able to hit the ground running because you've channeled a bit of good slow.
I really love the words that you use here, Carl, and I would love to repeat those back and also perhaps ask you a question. We stepped into the mind of Paul earlier on, and I was wondering if I could pick somebody else's mind and just echo those words that you've used. And let's say that we have Anna listening to us today, and she's very, very much convinced by this idea of wanting to reset, refresh, reboot, and recharge, as you say. So she goes home in the hope to reset, recharge, reboot, and finds that when she goes quiet or slows down, she can't quite manage the art of slowing down the rhythm of her thoughts, and actually finds herself very, very triggered by the silence because she's haunted by all these to-dos, shoulda, could have done, and the noise in her heads are actually more uncomfortable than seeking external stimulation by the way of TVs or any other form of entertainment. What would you say to her?
I would say you're on the right track if you're feeling uncomfortable and disturbed and maybe even a bit afraid, and stick with it, but do it slowly, right? So maybe tomorrow you come home and you just do that quiet silent for 1 minute, right? And then the next day you do it for 2 minutes, and just build up, build up slowly. And I mean, we've all got the same basic needs, right? And the same muscles and the same brains. We do need those moments of quiet and stillness, but we've become unaccustomed to them. So they feel strange and weird and a bit scary to us. But the muscles are there to be revivified and brought back. So, but build up slowly. Anna may also want to keep a journal of some kind. What is it that's really, what is there one particular thing that's coming to her that's really bothering her, that jumps into her mind and disturbs this time of serenity? Write it down at the end, and then think about, away from that slow moment, think about why that thing is bothering you so much and what you can do to, put it right or to make it less of a frightening problem. So that's another way. And another thing I think is sometimes to have a buddy system. No man is an island, all that stuff. It's easier to slow down in some ways together. So you have a friend, maybe each of you have. It may be difficult to coordinate this, but or maybe you don't have to do it at the same time, but you could each do for a week, you each do 1 minute, then 2 minutes, and then talk about what it was like. So a burden shared is a burden halved, right? Talk about what you felt weirded out by, what was uncomfortable, what did the other person find that helped them, and so and keep each other accountable. So if you come home one day and think, today I was supposed to do 4 minutes, I'm not going to do. Oh, hang on a minute, Anna's friend. Whatever, Charlotte is it doing? So Charlotte's going to expect to hear from me now. I don't want to lie to her, so I'll have to do it. So, you can sometimes strengthen this path to slowness by doing it together. There's a great quote, an old refrain saying, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that kind of gets at this idea that we are social creatures, we are social animals. We thrive when we do things together. So let's also slow down together. It's going to be easier and more fun.
And do you think that somewhere in the midst of all of this, there is somewhat a social fear that slow could be boring, or even deeper, that somehow slower means getting bored, which could be a bad thing? And personally, I think that state of boredom are actually to be cultivated because they foster a lot of creativity. And I do sometimes ask my clients to go and get bored, which is a very hard thing to achieve for a type A personality. And they often get bored. I can't quite remember last time I was bored. But isn't this interesting, right? As children, we say this to our parents, I'm bored. Would you agree with that, Carl? And as we go into adulthood, we get so busy that we don't even remember last time we were bored. But on the rare opportunities where we could cultivate boredom, we escape.
We panic.
Right. Yeah. What's your take on that? The connection between boredom, boring, and slow?
Well, I think there's definitely a cultural idea that slow is boring. I mean, slow is a pejorative term. It's a 4-letter word in our culture. It's synonymous with lazy, stupid, unproductive, boring, right? and in our culture, boring is also seen as a bad thing. It's seen as a bad thing. But like you, I regard it in a different light. I think the boredom can be a trampoline, a launch pad to deep, rich, incredible, tangled thoughts, to creativity. In fact, we know the science is pretty clear on this now, that having those moments of unstructured time, of not knowing what's coming next, of feeling a bit restless, being off the clock, a boredom, basically, that the brain is pushed into a more richer, more nuanced, more creative mode of thought that psychologists, they actually call that slow thinking, right? So the clue is in the title. And it's I think it's a real one of the great tragedies of modern parenting is that we've eliminated boredom from the equation. So throughout history, when a child came to a parent and said, I'm bored, that was the child's problem. Yeah. So your mom or your dad would say, well, too bad, go outside and play or find a friend. Or they would use that eternal expression, use your imagination. Now what happens when a child comes and says, I'm bored? Well, the parent freaks out and thinks, oh my God, kid's bored, I'm failing as a parent. Where's the iPad? Maybe we need another extracurricular activity in the schedule. No, actually, the total opposite in that moment. What you need to do is slow down, stop, and let the boredom happen. Because it is precisely in those moments of unstructured time, of not knowing what's coming next, of boredom, that children learn how to think, create, use their imagination. It's when they learn how to regulate their emotions, get along with their peers, look into themselves, and work out who they are rather than what everyone else wants them to be. I mean, boredom is one of the cornerstones of a childhood well lived, of childhood development, and yet we've edited it out of the equation. And not just for children, as you described a moment ago. It's so easy now with these, we walk around with a weapon of mass distraction in our pockets everywhere. So you feel a little itch of boredom coming on, and you just whip out your phone and look at LinkedIn or the news headlines or Spotify. And there's just we've just crowded ourselves away from any kind of thing that whiffs of boredom. And I think that leads to a superficial monomedia, one-dimensional life, right? Black and white instead of Technicolor, single tone instead of Dolby. And it's when you slow down and have those moments of not having something right there to do, you might think, oh, I feel a little bit bored. That's when the good stuff can start happening. But you have to slow down to let it blossom.
I was just smiling there because as you were saying that and speaking about the cornerstone and boredom, it really brought the thought on my mind that in the same way we go through all this leadership training and we sometimes miss out the elephant in the room, slowness, there is also 1.5 million training that can be found on creativity, right? How to be more creative. It's probably very Google thing, and a lot of courses. And yet one of the most fundamental things that we can do to be more creative is to start to use our imagination more. And the best way to do that is to slow down.
Yeah. I mean, and there the science is crystal clear, right? That time pressure, impatience, distraction, rushing is the enemy of creativity. You have to slow down to fire your creative juices, to get the furnaces of creation and invention going. You have to slow down. That's a given. But, we live in a culture where, well, slow is boring, slow is lazy, slow. So you're constantly bumping up against this weird paradox of all these people who are desperate to be more productive themselves, be more creative, get their teams to be more creative, but at the same time are saying, hurry up, get this, I want this, So these things, there's a disconnect there.
There is. And yet, as you say, the science is crystal clear, but I also think, thinking of life anecdotes, I am quite obsessed with sky and cloud gazing and ocean gazing. I grew up by the sea, and I do spend as much of my life as possible nearby water whenever accessible, which can be sometimes challenging when living in the city. And I found that my most creative ideas for the business of our clients, or when I have the most profound sense of being in touch with my imagination, is when I'm gazing, looking, just wandering, looking at the cloud or looking at the sky or looking at the sea. And it really nurtures ideation in this moment where I'm not thinking, my mind is actually creating idea, like that real essence of ideation. And This seems so basic and so simple, yet we don't do it very often as a society, right?
It is quite extraordinary how simple and obvious and intuitive it is. I mean, we all know it, I think, deep down, and yet the whole culture militates against it. The whole culture is telling us, don't slow down, that's a waste of time. Hurry up. But if you ask people, when do your best ideas come to you? I tell you what, no one ever says my best ideas come when I'm juggling 47 emails or racing to meet a deadline with the boss breathing down my neck. Actually, what? I often ask that question in events and stuff. And the number one answer you get around the world, whatever the audience, to the question, when do your best ideas come to you, is in the shower. Yeah.
Yes.
Or walking the dog. Yeah. Or swinging in a hammock on vacation. They come in those slow moments because there is a deep, abiding and intimate bond between slowness and creativity. And it's a bond that the greatest thinkers in the arts, sciences, and business have always understood, right? That you have to slow down to be creative, to get the creative juices flowing.
What about you, Carl? When do your best ideas come?
I do a lot of walking, actually. And I think they come when I'm walking, probably. Sometimes I'm prone to a long soak in the bath as well. So I've had a couple of pretty good breakthrough ideas there. Kind of literally eureka ideas in the bath. But I think walking. The other thing that, but I think we're all different. I mean, you can get into that slow zone or space in different ways. For me, I love cooking, right? I'm a big cook. And for me, cooking is like yoga. It's just so relaxing. I just look forward to cooking and doing things with food. And my mind wanders away when I'm doing that. And often I have quite good ideas when I'm cooking, when I'm chopping onions, stuff that's just automatic. I've been doing it for years. I can do it with my eyes shut, almost.
You've got all your fingers, so
I'm
that's
not quite,
good.
My knife skills aren't quite up to the level. I've got a few nicks here on my thumbs to prove it. But often I'll find that I've just had a kind of breakthrough idea as I'm scraping the chopped onion into the pan, that kind of thing. So it's in those kind of slow moments when the mind is just drifting.
Can you walk us through your non-negotiable slow habits? The ones, they might be tiny, they might be very small, but they're really so embedded into your life that you don't even have to force yourself into them. They're just part of your ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty good with my phone. I mean, I love my phone, and I feel the itch to look at it, more than I should. But I'm pretty disciplined about, leaving it out of the bedroom, or I never have a phone anywhere visible if I'm at a table with people or in a conversation, just nowhere, always off. My notifications are permanently turned off, so I never get a ping or anything I decide when I look at them. So all of that stuff with the tech is non-negotiable for me. What else? I mean, I do a lot of sports and stuff. So every day I do some kind of physical activity where my brain just switches off and I can go do, whether it's running or playing hockey or swimming or whatever it is, just something that involves moving my body around and letting my mind just kind of drift away and not have to think too much about anything. Those are a couple things. I mean, I'm someone who loves words and language and so on. So I do every night before I go to sleep, even if it's just a couple of pages. I read a lot of novels. And so I'll always read at least a little bit, because I just feel that, shifts you into a different mode. There's something about reading. I don't read with a screen. I read with a tactile page book of paper. And there's something about that physical act and being able to move back early in the book and check something. And it just moves you away from the speed of software, I find. So for reading is a non-negotiable for me as well.
Thank you, Carl. Really appreciate that. There is one more question on my mind, and it perhaps might sound as a bit of a bleak question to wrap up, but I know you are not only an expert in the slow movement, but an expert in ageism as well, which is a topic that I think is particularly topical. I have a question that relates to both topics, and it relates to something you mentioned earlier on, which was a lot of the time people are running because they're running away from, which I think is absolutely spot on and something that I can observe quite a lot. Could they be running away from the fear of dying?
Yes. I think that one of the drivers at a very deep cellular level of our speed culture and our pursuit of distraction is that we are trying to avoid thinking about the biggest deadline of all, which is death, right? the big one, right? The deadline with a capital D. So I think that at some deep tidal level, that is behind some of this speed, this busyness, this unwillingness to go deep and think hard and long, no question. But all of that being said, until someone discovers otherwise, death is inevitable, right? It's coming for all of us. And I actually think whenever people say, well, what are good ways to age well or age boldly or extend your longevity? I think that having an awareness of death, thinking of death is a useful thing. And I don't mean in a morbid, I'm going to get really depressed and think about death sort of way, but think of it as just part of the proverbial rich tapestry of life, right? It's part of the story. It's part of your story. It's part of mine. We've had people that we love die. It's part of the human experience, the great human opera that we're all part of. And actually, it's interesting. You find that most religions will have some kind of death meditation or rites that involve thinking about death, whether it's, Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead in Mexico, or death meditations in Buddhism. They all have this for a reason, because thinking about death actually has an upside, which is that it makes you treasure the moment of now. It makes you treasure the present more, make you feel more in the moment and make the most of it. So if you approach death with that light spirit, an open spirit, and think, okay, this is coming, it's good somewhere out there, but rather than running away from it, you don't have to run towards it either, right? But you just have an awareness of it. I think that can actually reflect back in a good way on the here and now and help you live more in a slow way, help you say, okay, because I've got a finite amount of time, I'm going to make the most of that time. And how am I going to do that? By giving each moment the time and attention it deserves. I'm going to be slow, in other words. So I think there's a little link there between my work on slow and my work on aging and ageism and rethinking and reframing the life course.
There is. When I did my homework around that topic and contemplated this idea and notion of death in a way that is not morbid, but actually quite serene, adopting a serene mindset around the principle of death and it being the ultimate deadline, I actually found at first quite a lot of sadness, because of course you think of people that have passed and your own mortality. But as I dig deeper and deeper, and this is not an overnight piece of work, this is taken quite a few years.
This is the fast version of some slow work you did.
And I do have to credit a lot of my meditation teachers for that work, but I found that it's the closest I got to ignited the desire for legacy. For me, what really came out of contemplating death was my passion and drive for building a legacy, to leave something remarkable behind. And actually, I find that exhilarating, because it gives me the fuel that I want the impact, I want the legacy, and I want to have that impact last after I'm gone, right?
Yeah.
And for some of us, it may be through motherhood or fatherhood or parenthood in general. For others, it may be through being an author or any other act to our communities. And I think that reflecting on legacy is a way to really perhaps dance with the notion of death in a way that is a little more acceptable.
It's a nice way to, I think that's true. I think that, in fact, there's a whole phenomenon to do with aging. It has different names. People call it gero-transcendence, and there's various other terms for it. But basically what it means is, and they've seen this phenomenon across all cultures and socioeconomic groups, is that as people get past about the age of 40, so I guess a time when you begin maybe for the first time to think about death a little bit more, that you become less obsessed with your own personal advancement, that people want to give back. They want to be of service. They want to leave a legacy. They want to make the world a better place and leave the world better than they found it. And that's a real human impulse that you find that goes, it's one of the benefits I think that you get as you move through the long arc of human life, is that switch in priorities, that pivot to something bigger than you. So what you described there, I think, is a very human and a very laudable and beautiful sentiment. And but it's not something you have to wait until you're 41 to have, right? I think you can cultivate that from any age. And many people have that at any age anyway, right? I know plenty of 20-somethings who are doing way more legacy-wise and to make the world a better place than some of my friends who are in their 40s and 50s. So this is not to say that everybody is the same according to their age, but just as a general rule, you tend to get that little bump in the second half of life. And probably it's because you're bumping up against that deadline. You're thinking a little bit, oh, okay, now it puts things in a different perspective. You see them through a different optical lens. But you can, as I say, cultivate that spirit at any age. And I think one way to do it is to think a little bit more about death, right? So in your 20s, I never thought about death at all. And if it ever came up, I thought, no, moving on swiftly. But I think if you do think about it, then it can help. You can have that same effect. You can enjoy that same, is it like an altruism dividend? I'm not quite sure what the right term here would be, but something, just that wanting to give back and be of service, that you can tickle that nerve at any age. And maybe one way to do that is to make a conscious effort to think a little bit about death sometimes.
Indeed. I believe so. Very much so. Carl, I'm incredibly grateful for all your insights and taking your time to slow down with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. I've had plenty to think about myself along the way. It's been a lot of fun.
I would love to perhaps ask you if anyone has listened and would like to find out a bit more about your work and all the wonderful programs and TED that you have done.
Yeah. Well, I've got it all in one simple link, which is, it's just my link tree. So it's my name, no punctuation, carlhonore.info, carlhonore.info. And there you'll find way more than anyone could ever want to know. Books, workbooks, courses, TED Talks, everything, video, audio, you name it. It's all there in one place.
Wonderful. Well, I'll be sure to include that link in the show notes. And to wrap up, is there one more word of wisdom? I would like to leave you the floor to bring this home.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you two words of wisdom. One is my own phrase, which I think I probably said along the way, but I'll just say it again, that in a world addicted to speed, slowness is a superpower. And then I'll just finish with a favorite quote of mine, which comes from Mae West, the black and white, is it 50s, 40s? Anyway, diva of all divas. She once said, anything worth doing is worth doing slowly. And I think there is so much wisdom and joy in that, and so much truth. So anything worth doing is worth doing slowly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Carl. I really appreciate it, and I wish you a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Same to you.
Thank you for spending your time with me today and listening to this episode. Remember to subscribe so that you can receive weekly updates. And if today's message resonated with you, please remember to share it with a friend, a colleague, or a loved one who could really benefit from this episode.